is going to be, on behalf of the Council, Madam Minister Jeanine Hennis-Plasschaert. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, let me be clear. The creation of the Schengen area, in which the free movement of persons across internal borders is ensured, is one of the greatest achievements of the Union. Without any doubt, it has brought important benefits to European citizens and business alike. Yet over the past months, the system has been severely tested by the migration crisis, leading several member states to reintroduce internal border controls. Now, as you all know, the aim is to ensure that any and all remaining obstacles are removed by the end of the year at the latest, for the costs of losing free movement within the Schengen area would be huge. Now, to overcome what emerged originally as a patchwork of unilateral decisions, we are developing a coordinated European approach within the framework of the Schengen rules, of course. And let me also underline that the practice of waving through has now ended. Clearly, securing the EU's external borders, ensuring efficient border controls and improving the functioning of the asylum system are prerequisites for restoring normal free movement within the Schengen area. And this is a shared responsibility involving all our institutions as well as the member states. In other words, proper control at our external borders is our common responsibility, hence the need to reinforce our collective ownership over that common good. Now, as we all know, last December the European Commission presented a proposal for a European border and coast guard. It is imperative that we adopt this proposal as soon as possible so that it becomes operational. And it is therefore of great importance to work together in order to start trilogues in June and strike a political agreement soon thereafter. In February, the European Council made itself very clear. Member States must grant access to asylum procedures for all applications made at their borders. At the same time, they should refuse entry to third country nationals who do not satisfy the entry conditions of the Schengen Border Code and who have not submitted an application for asylum despite having had the opportunity to do so. The European Council also underlined the importance of restoring the normal functioning of the Schengen area in a concerted manner, while giving full support to member states facing difficult circumstances. I am of course referring to Greece, whose external border has been under immense pressure. Now, fortunately, this pressure has, since the EU-Turkey statement of March 18, this pressure has significantly reduced. However, serious deficiencies in external border control persist today, even if many of them have been and are being tackled by Greece. And that is why the Commission presented on May 4 a proposal on Article 29 of the Schengen Borders Code, a proposal recommending a coherent EU approach to the reinstatement of internal border controls until the structural deficiencies are remedied, as well as proposing border controls only at the sections of the border where they are necessary and proportionate. Now, in closing, Mr. President, the effective application of all these policies and measures taken together, and the effective application by all of us, that should contribute to fully reinstating free movement within the Schengen area, and I sincerely hope that we will succeed before the end of the year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your important statement. And now I give the floor again on behalf of the Commission to Commissioner Avramopoulos. You have the floor.
Honourable members, the Schengen area is an area, as you all know, of free movement without internal borders. And we have repeatedly said here that it is maybe the most tangible achievement of the European integration. This Commission, from the very beginning, is doing everything in its power to make sure that we preserve it in accordance with the steps set out in our Back to Schengen roadmap. Our objective is to return to a normal functioning of the Schengen area with no internal border controls as soon as possible and within 6 months at the latest. Because the costs of internal border controls are already visible. We see transporters complain about increasing delays and costs. We see the tourism industry in some member states suffering. And this is only a small part, a fraction of what would happen if border controls were re-established systematically. But the political cost of non-Schengen would be much more important still. It would be a highly symbolic reversal of a major achievement of European integration. This is why we need to take coordinated action at European level, making use of the tools that the same Schengen border codes provide to us, so as to allow Member States to do what is necessary in the current circumstances while preserving Schengen as a whole. This is what our proposal under Article 29 Schengen Border Code is meant to achieve. Let me first acknowledge that Greece has made significant progress in the last few months. However, not all deficiencies identified in the management of external borders control have been remedied. This concerns in particular sea border surveillance, reception capacities and registration in the mainland of the migrants who had not been registered upon arrival in the islands. Despite the reduction in the flows due to our cooperation with Turkey, the sustainability of this reduction still has to be confirmed. Moreover, a number of these unregistered migrants remain in Greece or in other countries of the Western Balkans. They may seek to move irregularly to other member states. In other words, the reasons that led several states to unilaterally introduce temporary borders control still exist. The persistent threat of secondary movements puts at risk the overall function of the Schengen area. Therefore, a coherent, coordinated and sustainable common approach to temporary internal border control, as foreseen in Article 29 of the Schengen Borders Code, is needed at EU level. Article 29 is a tool to safeguard the functioning of the whole Schengen area, and it is the first time that the Commission makes use of it. As a result, we propose that the Council recommends that Austria, Germany, Sweden, Denmark and Norway maintain the internal border controls at specific border crossing points for up to 6 months. Controls will be regularly reviewed by the Schengen states concerned and adjusted to the level of the security threat addressed. The states concerned will also report to the Commission every 2 months. Let me be clear about 2 things. Article 29 is not a sanction against a member state, nor a means to expel it from the Schengen area. I want to be very clear on that. We do not propose the introduction of border controls at the Schengen border of Greece, namely at airports and ports. In addition, we clearly state that the controls introduced should be proportionate and limited to what is strictly necessary to respond to the serious threat and safeguard public policy and internal security. They should impede as little as possible the border crossing for the general public. The Commission will continuously monitor the situation and after 4 months will report to this Parliament and the Council on the possible need to adapt the application of its initial recommendation. The principles of necessity and proportionality are the guiding principles for this and any future decision. Let me therefore reiterate that our proposal is an exceptional temporary measure to ultimately allow for the safeguarding and return to a normal functioning Schengen area as soon as possible. It is expected that by the end of the 6-month period, the latest, the implementation of other tools will allow lifting all internal border controls and returning to a normally functioning Schengen. I refer in particular to the European Coast and Borders Guard, to the further sustained implementation of the EU-Turkey Statement, the full application of EU asylum rules, as well as a swift agreement by the co-legislators on the recently presented proposals reforming parts of the common European asylum system, in particular the Dublin system. We look forward to the Council adopting the proposed recommendation tomorrow. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Commissioner. Now we have time for speeches of representatives of political groups. As first, on behalf of EPP, Deputy Milan ZVER. 1.5 minutes. Take a floor, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I would certainly agree with everyone who has been supporting the Commission's efforts to return to a fully functioning Schengen system. That is a key task for the European Union at this moment. I think what is clear is that the better the protection of the external borders are, the greater the freedom that can be allowed within the Schengen space. This has been one of the greatest experiments in the history of the European Union, but it can only function if there is security and trust within the space. Schengen has a very important effect on the economy, and we can't forget that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that an end to the Schengen system would represent a possible end to the whole EU. We created Europe to create lasting peace. But these days, the EU and peace are no longer to be taken for granted. So we need to do everything possible to ensure that they are maintained. We see new forms of protectionism appearing. In the first half of the 20th century, that led to 2 world wars. We need to learn the lessons of history. We should deepen the values upon which the EU is based, and the functioning of the Schengen system is one of those values.
On behalf of SND Group, Madam Tanja FAJON. 2 minutes. Take a floor, please.
Thank you very much, President. It is a fact that the Schengen system has been under threat because of the refugee crisis. This is a fact that we have heard about, and now COREPER would like to extend border controls for several months now. Now, the situation has not yet stabilized, and it is still quite weak, and the situation is also quite alarming. But the causes or the reasons for the extension can be called into question. It seems like it is an a la carte system. Basically, what we're doing is creating more friction between the old and new member states of the European Union, and that's the last thing we need right now. We don't need either to use border controls to wage political campaigns. So we've seen this happen in Austria, where the army was sent to the border. That's a horrible thing to happen. Basically, they're fighting an invisible enemy, and this is a terrible signal to send to our European citizens. We need to do our utmost to make sure that the Commission draws up a report on the proportionality of the extension of border controls. We must take into consideration the fact that the entire transport system in the European Union has has been brought under threat. We may be losing between 8 to 10 billion euros a year because of the border controls, and we may be losing money also through tourism. And this is not really going to stop terrorist attacks. We've already seen that. What we need to do is control the external borders and help those countries that have been put under huge migratory pressure.
On behalf of ECR Group, Madam Monika Makovej, 1.5 minutes, take a floor, please.
Unfortunately, terrorist organizations have been underestimated. Radicalization has been underestimated. The European citizens who are now on the jihadi side have been underestimated. It is now high time for us to be reasonable and to react. Since September 2015, a few member states from the Schengen area have reinstated internal border controls. I have always been a supporter of the Schengen area. This is one of the greatest achievements of the European Union for the citizens and for businesses alike. It is now high time for Romania to join the Schengen area. We have been using the Schengen information system for a few years now. As a state at the external border of the Union, Romania would like to join the Schengen area and take its part of responsibility in the field of European security. As the Commissioner for Migration has said, an internal area without border controls is achievable only if we have solid protection of the external borders of the Union. Securing the external borders of the European Union is a prerequisite to maintain the freedom of movement in the Schengen area. And not only. We need to identify who crosses the European borders and why. And this can be done by introducing controls at the external borders of the European Union, both for European citizens and for third country nationals. And this should be done through a database check. But the condition is that the databases should be updated with real-time information by all the member states. Today, we have 23 member states which have not updated their databases for Schengen. Thank you.
Mulțumesc. Dziękuję bardzo. Pani
Thank you very much indeed.
ALDE Group, Madame Sofia in 't Veld, 2 minutes, take a floor, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On behalf of ALDE, I'm very glad we're having this debate. We requested it because we welcome the roadmap that was presented by the European Commission for restoring a fully functioning Schengen system. However, in practice, we don't see much progress. We see more rather than less border controls. We see walls being pulled up, not broken down, and we even a couple of days ago heard about a violent incident on the border of one of the Schengen countries with refugees being shot at. So the situation is actually getting worse, not better. And maybe Schengen is not dead yet, but it's certainly on life support. So what I would like to know from the European Commission is how strictly are you applying the criteria? Because you keep saying it has to be necessary and proportionate, but that seems to become a little bit a mantra because we don't see border controls disappearing. I don't see any steps in the direction of abolishing them. And we seem to think that it's a kind of replacement for a fully fledged refugee and security policy or a replacement for a European border and coast guard. But this is in the hands of the member states. The member states should take their responsibility and no longer hesitate about a common asylum policy, a common security policy and a border and coast guard, rather than reinstating border controls. And I think it has been said by others, Schengen is a great achievement, and the current border controls come at a huge economic cost. So we have every interest in abolishing the border controls as quickly as possible, and I would really like to know from the European Commission, how do you assess the recurrent requests from the member states for authorising border checks? Because quite frankly I haven't seen many cases where the Commission has said, sorry, this is simply not justified. When we say it has to be exceptional and temporary, we're talking about, I believe, Schengen countries now, or 8, for a very extended period of time. That doesn't sound like exceptional and temporary. I understand, and I'm concluding, Chair, that you're under a lot of pressure from the Member States who want the Commission to actually clean up the mess left by the Member States, but I really hope that you will resist the pressures. Thank you.
Dank je wel. On behalf of the NGL Group, Deputy Kostas CHRYSOGONOS, 1.5 minutes, take a floor, please.
The free circulation of people was one of the founding stones of the European Union, and the setting up of the Schengen area has made it easier to enjoy this freedom. But the pressure at our external border because of the inflow of refugees and migrants has led 7 member states to reinstalling border controls at specific internal borders within Schengen. Circumstances have changed, and as far as Greece is concerned, our country has made determined steps in order to control its external borders. The future of Europe without Schengen is doubtful, at least. The reintroduction of border controls between member states would cost billions of euro every year, and there would be a lot of consequences for transport, for trade and for tourism. And there are also other disadvantages that you can't put a cost to. For example, the degradation of the quality of life for around 2 million European citizens who cross the border every day to get to their job. So independently of the financial consequences, scrapping the Schengen area would be a step backwards in the path towards European integration. So we need to make sure that there are no longer any border controls in the internal borders of the European Union as soon as possible, please.
On behalf of Greens, Madam Ska Keller, 2 minutes, take a floor, please.
Thank you. Overcoming borders, it has been said, is at the heart of the European idea. Borders that used to be once the cause of war could be crossed easily in the past. And I believe it is really at the borders where European citizens can see and experience the true value of the European idea and what Europe really means. But the fences and the borders that have been erected in the past month destroy pretty much all of that. They divide people. It is harmful to the economy, and it destroys the fundament of Europe. Just look at the Brenner, look at Malmö, Copenhagen, look at the French-German border, look how all these border regions have integrated and how we're trying to do that much more to the east. And all of that is being disrupted, if not completely destroyed. That's why I believe, and that's why we believe, that this closing of borders has to end immediately and not just in a couple of months at the end of the year, whenever. And our internal borders are on the way to become as deadly as our external borders are. Slovak border guards have been shooting at refugees. A boat sank just yesterday in the sea between Denmark and Sweden. This is the situation we are right now. Do we want the Öresund to become the new Aegean in this respect? Closing borders does not stop people from coming. It only makes their journey more distressful and increases the death toll. Fences are not a solution for anything, neither at the internal borders nor at the external borders. And this Schengen debate really is a debate about the future of the European Union, about where we will stand tomorrow. But this future starts today. Whatever we do wrong right now cannot be mended tomorrow. This is why we need to get down with the fences, to overcome the borders once again, because this is what Europe is for. Let us not destroy this fundament, this stuff, what Europe is really built on. Thank you.
Danke. Excuse me, madam. Do you accept blue card from Mr. Janusz KORWIN-MIKKE? No. Thank you for this answer. Now, on behalf of the FDD Group, Madam Beatrix von STORCH. 1 minute, take a floor, please.
Ja, das Schengen-Abkommen. President, the Schengen Agreement guarantees travelling without border controls within the EU. However, if we're not going to have internal controls, we need an external border. Now, the external border was already pretty porous. Now, Merkel came along and tore it down. Schengen's dead. Anyone who wants it back has to secure the external borders of the Schengen zone, not a wall or a fence going up in Macedonia, which isn't part of Schengen, or getting a despot to protect the Turkish-Syrian border. Now, we need an Australian system before people come back to Lampedusa. We also need more money for reception centres and to help the refugees outside Europe. Now, anyone who wants to protect or who isn't allowed to be in Schengen has to leave it.
Vielen Dank. Now, on behalf of the group, Deputy Harald VILIMSKY. 1 minute, take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, President. Well, we're talking about Schengen, and I think the debate has brought out the fact that Schengen has major conceptual problems. It's well-meaning, but it's very badly implemented. I mean, to say that, you don't need to have anything against the principle of open borders. The question is, though, that the people in our countries need to feel secure, and that's not the case at the moment. It's the same as your flat. If you leave the door open, then it's a similar situation. The situation at the moment is not a clear one at the moment. Nobody's got an overview of who's coming into Europe. No one knows how many criminals are in part of those flows. How many knows how many terrorists are there? So for my country, Austria, we have an absolute need to ensure that we need to get control of our borders back until we can ensure that neither criminals nor terrorists nor undesirable or rather people whose origin can't be determined can come into our country.
Danke. Non-attached MEPs, Deputy Lampros FOUNTOULIS. 1 minute, take the floor, please.
The real question should have been today, do we really want to restore Schengen? Because given the structural weaknesses of the European Union, this treaty, I think, mainly serves traffickers, drug smugglers, arms smugglers, and we cannot in any way control the movement from one member state to the other of terrorist groups or criminal groups. They do that without being seen by the authorities. So there are security concerns which put Schengen under doubt, and we should also see how this treaty has allowed the weaker countries to lose their scientific staff who move to the northern countries, which means recession and backwardness for these countries. So before we install the Schengen Treaty, we should decide, should it exist? And I think that we should listen to the arguments, taking into account what the advantages for European citizens are, and not just think of ideology or feel emotional about it.
Dziękuję. Bardzo proszę, pan poseł Emil RADEV, 1,5 minuty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radev. A minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2015 events, the unprecedented number of migrants and the terrorist attacks in Paris have proved that our approach to managing the EU's external borders is not effective, and we fail to deal with today's challenges. What is more, these events demonstrated the imminent relationship between the need to protect the external borders of the EU and the need to maintain the freedom of movement of people in the EU and Schengen. I believe that the legislative proposals discussed today, such as the one concerning a common European border service, will result in a better and more effective management of our external borders. It is vital, however, to guarantee that we apply a single common European approach rather than having member states undertake separate steps. This is the only way to guarantee the integrity in the future of the entire Schengen area. Let me point out that the EU and Europe will enjoy a greater security if Bulgaria joins the Schengen area as soon as possible. As an external border to the EU, we are responsible for the security of 500 million European citizens. The efforts of the Bulgarian border police in the struggle against foreign fighters and illegal migrants has proved to be very successful and has often been cited as an example. I can safely say that Bulgaria protects our external borders better than certain other Schengen member states. Admitting our country into the Schengen area and granting it full access to the relevant information and databases will positively bring about more European security. Ladies and gentlemen, Schengen's future depends on our willingness to commit to a more European approach, and this includes getting Bulgaria into Schengen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. 2 minutes, please.
President, colleagues, this is not about ideology, as you've just said, but it's maybe somewhat about emotions. However, first and foremost, it's about what makes up the EU. The free movement of persons in the EU is one of the very few visible, tangible experiences, in particular for young people, and it's an advantage of the EU in their personal lives. Free movement of goods is an important part of the internal market, and economic circles have said that it would cost us more than 40 billion a year if these borders were closed. So it is complete nonsense to put up fences because they don't serve protection. They simply shift the problem of refugees to neighbours. And these fences and the border controls should make us aware that there is no kind of security presented by them. On Monday, I was able to celebrate Europe Day for 2 hours from Offenburg to Strasbourg because 3 police officials who were there, now they weren't doing it on a voluntary basis, but they closed the motorway to just 1 lane. Anyone who wants more security won't be able to explain that to anyone here in Alsace or in Germany. So, Commissioner, I'm very unhappy about your proposal. I think it's lukewarm. Now you're saying give us 6 months to continue with this and we'll report on it every 2 months. But you don't need to report on it every 2 months. You can draw up a report tomorrow morning if you start. It's nonsense. It's a sham of security and it is damaging for the EU as a whole.
Vielen Dank, Herr Abgeordneter Fleckenstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleckenstein.
A teraz pani poseł.
And now, Madam Wikström, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, President. Well, I feel that one of the aspects of the Schengen cooperation that we should pay more attention to is the economic consequences to a collapse of Schengen. Companies who depend upon deliveries at precise times, they're going to have trouble, they're going to lose competitiveness. Everybody who commutes across borders is going to lose time. This is going to cost up over €1 billion. Tourist income is going to be lost. Border controls are going to require staff, maybe up to €6 billion a year. Taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill. The result of all that is higher prices for consumers, less competitiveness for our companies, less profits that can be used to give people jobs, and at the end of the day, lower growth and damaged welfare systems across Europe. I think allowing Schengen to collapse is the best way we can kill our own economic prosperity. Why are politicians so determined to soar off the branch we're all sitting on?
Tak, dziękuję bardzo pani poseł. A teraz
Thank you very much, Madam. And now, Mr. HOOKEM, a minute and a half, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the wake of the terrorist attacks in Paris and Brussels, it was understandable that national governments would reinstate border controls to increase security and try to monitor who is coming in and out of a country. An alleged plot was uncovered yesterday by Italian police, revealing the ISIS-linked group were using migrant routes and open borders to plan terror attacks in Britain, Italy, France or Belgium. Just like this latest plot, the perpetrators of the Paris and Brussels murders cross internal EU borders unchecked, including between France, Belgium and Hungary. Some of them had even been to Syria and returned. In calling for borders to once again become a terrorist dream, the EU is showing it puts its die-hard dogma of a European superstate above the safety of the European people, who it's supposed to represent, and who pay for it. In the case of Britain, to the tune of £8 billion a year net. And die is a pertinent word, for the EU has blood on its hands. Schengen is not only the free movement of people, it's also the free movement of terrorists and Kalashnikovs. I question the principles of all those urging the UK to vote to remain in the EU. I also question the principles of those senior British military personnel who, like me, swore an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, but who have been telling voters we are safer in the EU. It is my sincere belief that the British people are safer outside of this leaking terrorist haven of a political union.
Thank you, Mr. HOOKEM. Mr. HOOKEM, do you accept blue card from Mr. KORWIN-MIKKE? Yes or no? Mr. HOOKEM? Do you accept blue card from Mr. HOOKEM? Yes. Please, bardzo proszę, panie pośle. No.
No?
Pan KORWIN-MIKKE, bardzo proszę.
Excuse me.
Ja chciałem spytać, czy nie uważa pan, że jest dziwne?
Well, I would like to ask you, don't you think it is weird then that on the left side of the room everybody keeps telling us that we need to keep the borders open, that no walls will help, but nobody says that the incentive has to be eliminated, that is social benefits. If we want to keep Schengen, we have to abolish social benefits. Do you agree with me?
Bardzo proszę o odpowiedź, panie pośle.
Could you respond, please? Half a minute.
Yeah, I do agree with you, yeah. But as I say, to me, this is a matter of safety and security for the people of Europe. Open borders is perpetuating the ISIS and the Daesh to come into the Europe and kill and murder at wholesale. We have to put back up the borders.
Dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Madam Janice ATKINSON, 1 minute, please.
Schengen's a failed project. I don't even know why we're even discussing it. And I really don't buy the economic argument. It's security that matters. What price do we put on our security? Schengen's open borders have allowed thousands of illegal migrants to camp at Calais for onward illegal entry into the UK. The French authorities have even allowed them, they've given them safe passage via trains to Calais. Commissioner, will you please pay attention when I'm speaking? Thank you. Dublin is being dumped, not because it didn't work, but because the states turned a blind eye. Now nation states are putting up borders. Borders work. That works. I was in Calais again last week. 5,500 migrants are camped there, all waiting illegally to break into my country. I've been there quite a lot of times. I've spoken to the various nations represented there, and I've asked them, are you refugees? But they're not refugees. They're economic migrants. Because I go there and ask them. I don't listen to the Commission. I don't listen to the left and the human rights industry that are promoting this. I go there and listen to them myself. When I was there last week, they were deciding they were refugees because the human rights industry were telling them they were. Real refugees don't choose and pick the borders where they want to stay. That's Schengen, that's allowed that, and that's why it's failed.
Thank you, madam. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Schoenfeld for a minute.
Thank you very much, President. The Schengen area is not only the fundament of the beautiful European idea and proof of our community, but also the basis of our economy. That's why we should protect it. But on the other hand, we should also be able to act in a crisis situation. And of course, the migration crisis is such a situation, and also the terrorist threat. And this means that we could, but also under some circumstances, the suspension of the Schengen area, but only in some places. But we also should remember that the threats remain, and these solutions will not be final, and Europeans are waiting for definitive solutions, and limitations are not the definitive solution, including sanctions. So hopefully this year we will make sure that the Schengen area is again guarantee for mobility in the European Union. Thank you very much. And now, next, Ana Gomes, 1.5 minutes.
Well, the Commission and Council want us to believe that we're on the way to restoring Schengen. We've seen significant progress. Oh, look at the situation in Greece. Shamefully, thousands of refugees are blocked, imprisoned, and threatened with deportation. And look at the border between Hungary and Slovakia, where soldiers or police forces are shooting at refugees. Like Austria, Denmark and Sweden have got closed borders because they consider it's a public order threat. And they're simply denying reality to the point that it hurts. Member states are violating the rules of Schengen, and the German the German and Austrian governments basically have closed the door to refugees, as had been announced last year. So why was no action taken against Mr. Orban when he refused relocation of refugees? Council, Commission, you've entered into this dirty deal with Erdogan. It's not just immoral, but it's unfeasible. And look at the developments in Turkey right now. That just proves it. I think that you're just got to displace refugees and people smugglers to other places. We have been calling for a review of the Dublin regulation. That should be based on burden sharing and sharing responsibilities among member states. This has to be seen as a European problem from this moment onwards. We desperately need more Europe, and more Europe means more Schengen. At the same time, we need to have a strategic approach that we do not have at present, unfortunately.
Next speaker, Mr. Marias, 1 minute.
The Schengen area in reality has not been functioning for months. Denmark, Sweden, Austria, Germany are countries which have suspended the treaty, and with today's Commission's proposal it's made official. There's a suspension of Schengen for 2 years, which will lead us to closed borders, and Greece will be a huge refugee camp. So instead of relocating refugees from Greece to the European Union, we will be a huge refugee concentration camp, something like Dachau. So we've become a magnet for the million of refugees who are in Turkey, who prefer to take the risk of drowning in the Aegean and getting to Greece rather than safely going to Bulgaria, which is not a Schengen country. So they prefer Greece because it's a Schengen country which gives Schengen travel documents and allows them to travel to Germany. So the only solution for Greece right now is to leave from the Schengen Treaty right now, to stop being a magnet for migrants, and this should have happened from the 11th of December. I think now it's the time to implement this.
You have a point of order? Mr. LAVRILLEUX.
Madame la Présidente, je voudrais faire un...
Madam, I would just like to recall the rules. This is not the first time that Mr. Marias compares the refugee camps in Greece with what happened in concentration camps. He was comparing it to Dachau in France, and we, our parliament here, situated in France. Any type of negationism is punishable by law. And any reference to Dachau is a revisionist and the speaker is interrupted.
Because it's not part of our debate. If you wanted to address a blue card, you should have raised a blue card. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you, but this is not a point of order. Now the next speaker is Mr. Griesbeck. Would you please create the conditions of our colleagues to take the floor? Mr. Marias, I'm not going to give you now the floor. You just had the floor. What does it mean? Just a second. What did he say? I can't hear you if you don't use the microphone, because then I don't have translation, and most unfortunately I don't understand.
I asked to take the floor because a colleague talked about me personally. I'd like to explain to my colleague that I'm one of those people who have condemned both Dachau and the concentration camps. I am one of those people who have very clearly, during my political life, has condemned these practices, and which is why I've asked for damages to be paid to the Greeks who died in Nazi concentration camps from Germany. So my position is crystal clear. So what I said, and I want you to understand this, is that once you have trapped thousands of refugees in Greece, then they will be trapped as if.
Good. Mr. Marias, please. Mr. Marias, please. We are out of the debate right now with all these statements. Would you please stop there? And everything you said is already noted in the minutes. You will have it reflected there. Thank you very much. I think it's enough for now. Now, Madam Griesbeck, for 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Thank you, President. To come back to Schengen, Schengen has become a paradox, a living paradox. Today it's a word used by some people who, in order to remove free movement, are using it as a scapegoat for all ills. And there are others, and I'm part of them, and I hope that many Europeans agree with me, consider that the most specific thing that Europe contributes is that it's the most tangible value. Now, in my constituency, there's it's a neighbour of Luxembourg and Germany, so there's 3 countries, and Schengen is part of the day-to-day lives of these cross-border workers. So Schengen is men and women, it's activities, exchanges, economy, trade. 1.25 billion movements across the EU without counting students. Now, of course, improvements can and should be made to strengthen it, in particular through the communication from the Commission back to Schengen. However, there are many different responses. One of them we've already debated, which is going to be put to the vote to the Parliament, and that of external borders and a European border Coast Guard. That's for the countries at the borders to be assisted, and it's also about having intelligence at the borders. That's our common interest, but in particular it's our European responsibility, and that has to be a shared one. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. LeBreton, 1 minute.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Council Commission in Brussels announced their resolve to restore Schengen system, which is fully functional. This is Euro jargon, and that means that we need to save private Schengen. That's going to cost us a lot of money, 6 billion given to Turkey, and visa promises for 70,000 Turks. Why? To persuade them to please take back 70,000 migrants. The other migrants, which now number the millions, are coming into the member states. It's unfortunate for those member states who want to resist this, because it's going to cost them €250,000 a head. And Schengen is a total failure. It is a sieve, and it's impossible to gap the holes. We must take care of the situation.
Polčák, 1 minute and a half.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně, za udělení slova. Podle mého...
Thank you very much, Madam President, for giving me the floor. I am absolutely convinced that freedom of movement in Europe is an important right for Europe's citizens, and it is under threat at the moment. We've already heard comments on the effects on the economic competitiveness of our companies. This could lead to an economic collapse. People are saying, I'm not sure if that's overblowing it a bit, but nevertheless, the economic costs are a major threat. So I find this all rather alarming. This means the Commission has a clear political task ahead of it, and the same goes for the Council. The Council and Commission need to work together with their full efforts to ensure that Schengen can work properly. The costs that we're facing in the economy are a political issue as well. What would it mean for Europe's citizens if one of the most visible benefits of Europe were to disappear? I mean, I think that this is something that's very difficult to predict today. Well, we talk about security, but one political task of government is naturally to ensure the security of citizens. And nevertheless, in spite of this, we cannot allow this important and very visible freedom to be sacrificed. This is a task primarily for their member states and for the EU institutions. The return policy needs to be properly applied so that Schengen can properly function once again.
1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Schengen system is something which has been very important, and it's something which is very tangible to our citizens. It's a day-to-day reality, and it's very important, but it's also important to realize that Schengen is a sign of unity, and for this reason it is lamentable to see that some member states are pushing away from something that we have fought so hard to achieve. And there are those who are trying to who feel that closing the borders is going to solve the migration and refugee crisis, but that's not true. It's going to make the situation worse. It seems that there are various concerns in member states about law and order. We can see what happened in Austria over the past days. We must understand that we cannot use the extreme right means to fight demagoguery. It is the refugees who are going to pay the highest price. There was a Syrian woman who was 26 years old who was seriously wounded when the border guards opened fire on her. We cannot accept the extremist policies. It is not refugees who are threatening Schengen. It's populism that's doing that.
1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, President. An important part of our discussion on Schengen has been devoted to Greece. Now, Greece at the moment is at the centre of our interest, but we shouldn't just look at a small part of the problem. If the route is shifted, then to our surprise, we will see that at other external borders there are just as many shortcomings. We have to recognise that saving Schengen isn't something we can just say yes or no to. In actual fact, it's a moral obligation to make sure that we have common protection for our external borders so that we can keep the internal borders open. This external border surveillance has to be based on confidence and trust vis-à-vis third countries. The Commission and the Parliament have already taken steps in this direction. As often, it's failing with the Member States. We have to be honest with ourselves and our people. Schengen is more than simply the passport controls being removed. Schengen is an achievement. It's a key part of the EU Union and a precondition for wealth and growth. Thank you.
Mr. Coelho, 1 minute and a half.
Madam President and Madam Minister, Commissioner, we don't support anyone who would try to destroy Schengen. We could criticise the lack of action, the lack of solidarity, and the steps backwards in Europe's achievements. Controls at the borders might be a painkiller, a palliative to gain some time, but we need to win time to defeat the disease. We have to solve the long-term problems at the same time as we respond to the short-term emergencies. In the immediate term, we need to show solidarity with Greece and ask the Greek government to show more determination and efficiency. Well, the proposals presented by the Commission are quite predictable in prolonging the border controls. They don't destroy Schengen, but they prolong a period that's been quite chaotic, a transition period where the Member States have been using their prerogatives. I'm worried that they're falling for populist discourse, and I think the Commission's proposal should mitigate this somewhat. But the decision should not simply be used to justify the irrationality and the national selfishness that we've seen. This proposal is a result of the assessment of the state of the external borders in Greece. The shortcomings still need to be corrected. Alone, Greece will never manage to do this, as the Commission recognises. Although there are problems with border management, I think everyone agrees that the main problems in the area of asylum and not the Schengen assessments, which are really at the root of the problem. Thank you.
Mr. Weidenholzer, 1 minute.
The continual extension of border controls is an infringement, and the danger is that Europe is being changed until we can't recognise it. Now, many people today see that the reintroduction of border controls is a political panacea, for example, at the Brenner. Now, it's positive that the Commission and the Council see there's a problem. However, I'm not in agreement with the solutions put forward. And the poor quality of the debate reflects this. Because of the serious measures, we need a proper transparent discussion, not just amongst the ambassadors and not in a development ministry as is happening now. The European Parliament has to be involved, not simply informed. And can I remind you that 3 years ago in the European Parliament we called on the being involved in the Schengen assessment. At the time the Council showed us the cold shoulder, and that was a very poor decision.
Mr. Telička, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to also reiterate that Schengen is just unprecedented. I mean, its value cannot be matched, and we need to maintain it and, of course, develop. But in order to do that, we really need to safeguard the external border. Commissioner, you have identified the deficiencies, but I think that any member state will always have a difficulty. And I think that this is just yet one other argument to have a European coast and border guard, a European one, an efficient one with all the capacities. If we have that, and if we also reform the asylum system, but with a strict return policy, and if we're going to be efficient with it, and if we really will identify the key issue, which are the real refugees, then we will have also solidarity. And we need solidarity and unity in order to perform and to deliver. The 250,000 is going in the opposite direction. Sorry to say so, but that's killing the unity. Otherwise, on these aspects, if we will work, for sure we will achieve it. One final remark. There were some views from the left side of the hemicycle, just one sentence, saying that Schengen is basically contributing to terrorism. In that logic, we would have to build borders in London, in Paris, between districts. It's just a stupidity and nonsense. Sorry.
Yes. Mr. Mamikins, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. The Schengen Agreement is one of the most important achievements of European integration. The current migrant crisis, however, has severely damaged the possibility of Schengen's further unaltered functioning. Every state has the right to promote its security by whatever legal means available, but the introduction of internal border controls within Schengen takes place mostly unilaterally without any serious assessment of the underlying systemic consequences. As a result, should the border controls ever be fully re-established, the EU economy, cooperation and development across many areas shall severely suffer. That, quite frankly, makes the estimated yearly costs of 5 to 18 billion euros a serious understatement. Ensuring better protection of the external borders and assisting the member states that suffer the most is absolutely necessary. However, since one of the main reasons for reintroduction of border controls was and still is their thoroughness, revision of internal cross-border security measures is highly warranted. The only one who can fix the situation are the Europeans themselves. No deals with rather untrustworthy and unpredictable neighbours will ever do that for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Madam Kaili, 1 minute.
Κυρία Πρόεδρε, κύριε Επίτροπε, αντιλαμβανόμαστε...
We do understand, Commissioner, that you have one of the most complex portfolios, and this might be a provisional situation, but it's very difficult to foresee when we'll be able to vertically control it. So could you give us some clarifications? Because, first of all countries need to respect our agreements, and mostly Greece, because it's going through a very dramatic crisis. What will the cost of the protection of our external sea borders will be, and which part of that cost will be undertaken by Europe? Also, a timetable for Frontex and NATO and its actions there, and also if the requirements of Turkey are not complied with, then what are your concerns? What do you think will happen to people who are already trapped in Greece? And a last question, could we also have a timetable for when we will see Schengen restored and when it will be functioning better? And can you confirm that no country will exit the Schengen agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. Now the catch the eye procedure. We have a couple of requests. We start with Madam Maletić.
Zahvaljujem predsjedavajuća, poštovani povjereniče.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner. Quite frankly, if we do away with Schengen, we would actually have to experience the fear of the terrorist threat. The costs of Schengen are 15 billion plus a year, but it could be better to use those funds to strengthen Frontex and the border guards and the external borders of the European Union. For this reason, I would agree with the Commission plan as defined jointly with the Member States. The Member States need to take ownership of the plan, and they need to make sure that it is implemented properly. I've heard some people say that they can't see how Schengen can be helpful. Well, I can tell you that a Croat automobile can traverse Slovenia, Austria, and other parts of Europe without losing any time at the borders. We would like to enter Schengen as soon as possible, so please do help us reach that goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Kyenge.
Thank you, President. The end of Schengen would mean the beginning of the end of the European project. The damage caused would be incalculable for every European citizen who would suddenly find themselves in a fragmented Europe of small countries that would fall prey to national egoism. We would lose the freedom to easily move from one point of Europe to another. That would be damage to our economy, damage to our tourism industry, damage to our transport sector. If I think about my own country, Italy, we would find ourselves alone managing the refugee crisis. Schengen can and must be saved to save Europe, with a holistic approach dealing with the entire phenomenon of migration, so that we could ambitiously modify Dublin and respond to the humanitarian emergency that we face, so that we can intervene and deal with the underlying causes that forces people to leave their own countries. We need a strong foreign policy that involves cooperation for development. Thank you.
Madam Šojdrová.
Děkuji, kolegyně a kolegové.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Free movement of persons within the Schengen area is a symbolic achievement of EU integration, but freedom is only possible if it's accompanied by responsibility. In this case, responsibility for a more secure external border. The external border, however, is not sufficiently secured, and I understand the fears of the people who are worried about their security. And for that reason, I consider the temporary measures adopted by some member states is something I understand. The Commission isn't proposing anything different as long as the external borders aren't properly protected. Illegal migration will continue, and these temporary controls will be necessary in the meantime. Freedom without responsibility is not possible and not sustainable. Thank you.
Kyuchuk.
Thank you, Madam President. The Schengen area is one of the tangible achievements of Europe. It guarantees the free movement of millions of European citizens. However, 6 member states of Schengen reintroduced border control because of the migratory pressure. This reintroduction of the border control is detrimental to trade and detrimental to the European project, resulting in populist rhetoric and extremism. This is why I think that the Schengen area should be reintroduced at the latest by the end of this year. This is why we have to guarantee the external borders of the European Union by strengthening the border and coast guard system based on solidarity. The member states that are not members of the Schengen area, like Bulgaria and Romania, should be admitted to it. I think that the Schengen system is the symbol of the European integration.
Thank you very much, President. The full operationality of Schengen is the sine qua non condition for building Europe. But at this particular moment we have to defend the Schengen Treaty tooth and nail to try and combat growing nationalism. Free movement of people is one of the first objectives of the European Union, going back to the Single European Act. It's one of the greatest achievements of the European Union. Managing migratory flows is important, and suspending Schengen can only be a temporary solution to the emergency. But what we need in the long term is a proper European system for asylum and migration. We also need integrated services for the police and for managing our borders. And common responsibility is a historical duty, so that solidarity can prevail over skepticism and fear.
Thank you. That concludes our debate with political groups. Now the floor to Commissioner Avramopoulos. Please, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, dear colleagues, first of all, allow me to express my thanks for your interventions and your contribution. Ms. Intveld, Ms. Fajon, I will reply to your concerns. What prevailed is the need to ensure a coordinated, coherent European approach. We have set a timetable, a roadmap, and we implement it. We clearly state that we will be monitoring the application of our recommendations. Member States are expected to adjust the controls to the level of the threat. And yes, some Member States have stopped the controls when they were not necessary. And yes, on a different case, on Brenner, for instance, I have sent a very clear letter that we do not agree with the introduction of border controls, of border checks, as the situation currently stands. Our very constructive discussion gives me confidence that most of us in this House believe in, work for and support the need for more Europe. The message is clear. We will walk this way together, together and united, with a spirit of true solidarity and responsibility, as our treaties expresses verbi stipulate. Going back to Schengen will allow the reorientation of our common European endeavour towards a deeper and more integrated union. An achievement with tangible, important benefits in the everyday life of the citizens of Europe and businesses. May I draw now the attention to those who are in favour of building walls, erecting fences and fortresses afraid of outside enemies. Be aware of the Trojan horse carrying xenophobia, racism, populism and extremism. And Europe has suffered in the past from elements like this. Border controls should take place only as long as required to address the threat to public policy and internal security. It is an exceptional measure to be used only in exceptional circumstances. It should not obey to myopic, short-term domestic policy and tactics. Since you asked me about Greece, allow me to answer as well in Greek now. Κυρίες και κύριοι, κυρία Kaili.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Kaili, you asked very important questions. The European Commission will put an end to any scenario or rumours which paradoxically still rules the day on sending members out of the Schengen Treaty and on the imposition of so-called sanctions. Article 29, which has been activated for the first time, does not want to punish but to safeguard the correct functioning of the Schengen area. We do not impose controls at the airports and at the ports, and we offer the full support of the European Commission, which I've said before when I took the floor. Greece can now show very important progress over the past few months in the area of efficient control of common external borders. Obviously, we cannot turn away from weaknesses, deficiencies, because yes, they do subsist. But we can also not turn away our eyes from the fact that Greece had to deal with migratory and refugee inflows which were unknown in their dimension. It follows the correct path, but it needs to conclude the effective implementation on all points which have been put to its attention. We use every technical assistance available all resources available. We have a specific and cohesive plan, a holistic strategy, and the first results can already be felt. So in this context, the initial implementation of the first implementation of the agreement between EU and Turkey and the undergoing actions of NATO and Frontex have contributed to the drastic reduction in the numbers of irregular immigrants and asylum seekers. Honourable members of the European Parliament, the European example can prove that through crises, Europe becomes stronger. And this is what will happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now for the Council, Madam Minister Hennis-Plasschaert, you have the floor.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think that Mr. ZVER touched upon the essence of what we are discussing when he said the better the control of our external borders, the more freedom we can allow within our borders. And with all of you, I agree, or most of you, I have to say, that I agree that it's of the greatest importance to restore the full freedom of movement in the Schengen area as soon as possible, as soon as the circumstances allow us to act accordingly. Now, some of you remarked that things are getting worse rather than better. I beg to differ. The utter chaos that we experienced at our borders earlier this year is disappearing. We are regaining control. But it's true, we need to further stabilize the situation. And this further stabilization of the situation is necessary before we can lift all controls and return to normal again. And yes, I do agree with all who have said that the controls need to be exceptional, need to be temporary, proportionate, I have to say. That is exactly what the proposal of the Commission aims to do. And that is why we hope to adopt a decision tomorrow at the Foreign Affairs Council. But of course Mrs. in 't Veld is totally right when she says that Schengen is one of the greatest European achievements. I totally agree with her. And Mrs. Fajon and others are right in pointing out the economic consequences of the Schengen if the Schengen area would fall apart. So, I mean, we heard things like, I don't buy the economic argument. Well, I do buy it. It's of great importance for all our citizens and business alike. So, as I said earlier, the aim is to ensure that any and all remaining obstacles are removed by the end of the year, at the latest. And I sincerely hope that we will collectively succeed soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Now, we concluded the debate, so the debate is closed. We move to the next item of our agenda, which is statements from Council and Commission regarding Turkey's progress in fulfilling the requirements of the visa liberalization roadmap. For this debate, we start first with the Council. So again, Madam Minister, when you are ready, it's no rush.
Yes.
Turkey.
Thank you. Now, Madam Chair, thank you again, dear members, Mr. Commissioner. Let me start by saying that I consider this debate as a truly useful opportunity to hear your views on the issue. From the outset, I must, however, underline that my own comments will be preliminary. The Council has just started examining the report presented by the European Commission. In other words, there is no Council position yet. First of all, I would like to stress that visa liberalisation for Turkey is a long-standing commitment. Back in 2011, it was decided to start this process. The roadmap was adopted already in the year 2013. And what did the EU-Turkey statement do on March 18? It accelerated the existing process. Now, secondly, I would like to stress that visa freedom for Turkey is something that benefits, at the very end, all parties concerned. Not only can Turkish citizens travel to Europe more easily, also the millions of Europeans visiting Turkey for holidays or business, for example. Also, the millions of Europeans can do so more easily. It will facilitate people-to-people contacts. And it was, I believe, I don't know whether she's in the chamber today, but it was one of your MEPs, Judith Sargentini, who said it's also about the Turkish human rights defenders who will be able to travel to Europe freely to tell their story. In other words, this is not just a present to President Erdogan, neither should it be seen as just a concession of Europe to Turkey. It is something from which we, at the very end, all benefit. Now, in the Commission's third report, it is concluded that Turkey has achieved remarkable progress. However, it also becomes abundantly clear that Turkey has not yet managed to fulfill all 72 benchmarks. 7 benchmarks remain unfulfilled. Regarding 2 of these 7 outstanding requirements, the Commission has noted that for practical and procedural reasons, Turkey needs a longer timeline for implementation. Now, with regard to the biometric passports, the practical solution consists of limiting visa freedom to the holders of the latest generation of biometric passports. And when it comes to Turkey's obligation to build up a track record under the EU-Turkey readmission agreement, we simply need a bit more time, as this agreement only becomes effective next month. For the other 5 requirements, the Commission has invited the Turkish authorities to urgently undertake the measures that are necessary to fulfill these benchmarks. In other words, Turkey has a lot of homework to do. And also from this chair, I urge the Turkish government to intensify its efforts. Now, as you know, we have, besides Turkey, also visa freedom proposals on the table for Georgia, Ukraine, Kosovo. Now, at the same time, the Commission presented a proposal to amend Regulation 539 with a view to revising the current suspension mechanism. The main objective is to strengthen this mechanism by making it easier for Member States to notify circumstances leading to a possible suspension, and by enabling the Commission to